Welcome back to Pod Save the World. I'm Tommy Vietor.
I'm Ben Rhodes.
For the last several weeks, really, we've talked about Alexei Navalny. And last week, we talked about his return to Russia and his subsequent arrest. Navalny is a Russian opposition leader. He's an anti-corruption activist, and he recently survived an assassination attempt by the Russian intelligence services. So Navalny, right before he got thrown in jail, called on Russians to take to the streets in protests over the weekend. They did. We talk about those protests more later with our guests. But Ben, we saw that Biden called Putin today, and I figured we could dig into this White House piece because it's complicated. So according to the White House readout of the call, Biden and Putin discussed the New START treaty, Ukraine's sovereignty, the Solar Winds hack, reports about Russian bounties on U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan, interference in the 2020 U.S. election, and the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. Sounds like a very fun call. It does underscore the complexity of the relationship, right? Like Biden wants to extend the New START treaty, which is a critical arms control agreement that reduces the number of deployed U.S. and Russian nuclear weapons. He needs Putin to work with him on that, but he also needs to warn Putin when it comes to the treatment of opposition leaders, hacking, Ukraine, this bounty story. So Ben, what did you make of that set of topics? And what is your guess for over/under on the duration of that phone call with that many things to cover?
I'll start with the duration. I'm going to say 90 minutes, Tommy, but maybe it was shorter because it was the first one.
90 is a good call.
90 is a good call. I'm going to there's a few things that jumped out to me about this. The first is this is the first time that Vladimir Putin is going to hear from an American president about Russian bounties on our troops, about Alexei Navalny, period, about the Solar Winds hack. That alone is kind of amazing, kind of astonishing to think about, that like this is the first time an American president has uttered those words to Vladimir Putin. So it's clearly a change from what Putin had before in Trump in office. I was trying to think about like how to convey to people what it's like to be on these calls, because it sounds like a pretty awkward list. But the reality is, with Putin, because he's willing to lie, these calls become actually very unusual. So, for instance, I remember being on a bunch of 90-minute calls between Putin and Obama at the height of the war in Ukraine. And Obama would be laying out all our concerns about what Russia was doing in eastern Ukraine. And then Putin would give a very long speech just denying that they were even there. So it's not like two people yelling at each other about awkward topics. It's kind of about you registering your concerns and pushing through the fact that Putin, in response, I bet he denied that Russia was responsible for that hack. I'm sure he denied that they put bounties on our troops, right? I'm sure he said Alexei Navalny doesn't really have any support in Russia and it's all fomented from the outside. So in a strange way, Biden has to kind of register these concerns for Putin, not expecting to like change his mind on that call, but rather just to kind of signal to him, hey, this is what I care about. And then I think people have to understand this isn't going to be a situation where the Biden people come in and have some, magic elixir to deal with these things. Part of what they're going to have to do is spend the next few weeks getting coordinated with Europe so that we can say, okay, what can we all do together to express support for Alexei Navalny and for democratic rights inside of Russia? What can we all do to strengthen our cyber defenses and potentially consider responses to Russian hacks and this type of thing? So Biden's doesn't even currently have the playbook developed in terms of what exactly he's going to do on all these issues. The job in this call is to like set down some markers. This is what I care about. This is the kind of thing where there are going to be consequences, and then spend the next few weeks not just developing those internally, but with allies, figuring out like what is a coordinated approach that can be taken to Russia. So, this is the beginning of the story. This phone call, nowhere near even the end of the beginning.
Yeah, that's right. It's also interesting that the Russian bounties issue came up because there is a swath of people, mostly on the left, online, that is seeming to convince themselves that Russian bounty story was not accurate, that it was walked back by the Trump administration, even though Mike Pompeo said he raised it with his Russian counterpart, I believe. So it was interesting that Biden raised that at the highest level on the first phone call. Seems to suggest that evidence actually was pretty solid, or else why waste your time?
That's exactly right. So Biden has had access to the intelligence for a week now. And, the people who came out and denied it from the Trump administration were kind of the far end MAGA hacks, dead enders types, not the career people. The career people always suggested that this intelligence was true. And the fact that he raised it shows you that Joe Biden has looked at the intelligence on both the hack and the bounties and concluded that this is true, and I have to raise it with Vladimir Putin. So there is, you're right, there's a message in that readout.
I am very excited to welcome my guest today all the way from Russia. Alexey Kovalyov is the investigations editor at Meduza, an independent Russian news outlet. Alexey, it's great to see you.
Hi there.
So we've been talking a lot about Alexei Navalny on this show. Listeners by now are familiar with his poisoning, his return to Russia from Germany, and then his call for protests over the weekend. Can you just start by describing, what those protests were like this weekend? We saw a lot of clips on social media. There were clips of people pegging police with snowballs that looked different than what we'd seen before. But how are they different or not different from past protests you've seen?
Well, they were quite different in spirit. I mean, in the past they were usually the people, mostly Alexei Navalny supporters, would at least seek some sort of permit or authorization from the city government. But not this time. This time nobody even bothered to obtain one because we are at a stage where Navalny, previously considered as an enemy of the state, to whom at least some rules of engagement still applied, he's now been elevated to the status of a traitor, and a national traitor by the propaganda, a foreign agent. And no rule of law applies to him except the laws that they use to prosecute him. And his supporters and his allies are seen as co-conspirators. So it's pointless to even engage with the state to obtain some authorization. So this time they didn't even bother, and people just came out. It's really hard to estimate how many, because normally in Moscow, if a protest is sanctioned by the government, it's normally confined to a square or wide avenue in downtown where these kinds of rallies usually take place, and there it's pretty easy to say, okay, this is like you can look at a crowd and say, okay, this is 20,000 people or this is 50,000 people, but now most of these it wasn't a single crowd, it was just groups of people wandering throughout the city. So
right.
Estimates vary from the police's own figure, it was 4,000 people, but it was clearly much more than that. So the highest estimate was about 40,000 people, but it's really hard to say. But Navalny's people are saying that no fewer than 250,000 people came out across all of Russia.
Wow.
Which seems to be, well, it might be a little too high, but not too much, because we've seen footage from places where people literally came out to protest for the second time or first time in the history of this little town, and there were incredible footage and images of people coming out to protest in places like Yakutsk, where temperatures dropped below minus 60 Fahrenheit.
That's amazing. Truly.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. But there are a lot of places in Russia, like places in Siberia, where
right, we're still chilly.
Where it's well below minus 40. No
thanks.
Yeah.
You had a great piece in the New York Times today, Tuesday, that I thought was fascinating, that everyone should go read. But in that piece you wrote, it would be foolish to think that the protests are going to lead to significant political changes or concessions from the state. If anything, they will probably lead to more criminal cases and more repressive laws. Curious why you think that's the case, and if so, what Navalny's strategy is here. Like, what is the end game for these protests if you think it could actually make the situation worse?
Okay, so here's the thing. In Russia, demanding something from the state or cornering it never yields the result you want to, because if you demand a stop to corruption, for example, you'll get more corruption. So as to, for example, this is usually what happens with Navalny's investigation into corruption at the highest level of the Russian government. If he credibly accuses an official of corruption, he is never fired or demoted. More than that, he's often promoted. Or if the charges are really, really serious, it's going to take, for example, in a year or so, he'll be quietly transferred to a different department, for example,
right.
so as not to create a feedback, so as not the state is not seen as caving in to popular demands, because the state, the government, Putin doesn't want to be seen as weak, as caving in to demands. So it works. There's kind of a negative feedback loop there.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah. What is Navalny's endgame? It's upping the ante. He's pretty similar to Putin in that respect, because he often does things that are almost seen as suicidal, and his latest move, like going to Russia, despite all the threats that he will be jailed, and he was indeed arrested, and there's this quite serious risk that he will be jailed for a lot longer than 30 days, the term that he's currently serving. But he's a risk taker like Putin. The moves he's making can be seen outside of his logic as self-destructive. For example, in 2016, when Russian hackers interfered in the U.S. elections, it didn't bring any positive result. We didn't get anything from it. If the end game was installing a friendly president who would do Russia's bidding, that never happened. If anything, we got more sanctions than that. But that's well within also Putin's logic of always upping the ante in a game, punching well above your weight. So Navalny and Putin are pretty similar in that respect, in that they're risk takers.
Well, speaking of the upping the ante, I mean, you made the point to some folks on my team that, we've seen some bad police abuses. We've seen people getting beaten, but we haven't seen Russian police firing rubber bullets, pepper spray, water cannons, things we've seen used against American protesters, frankly. Why do you think there's been that sort of relative restraint, and how worried are folks about potential escalation?
Well, I've been covering these mass protests in Russia for over a decade now. And although they always seem like pretty brutal on pictures, they've never crossed the line between simply beating the crap out of people with truncheons and actually, attacking them with water cannons or rubber bullets. That's never happened in the history of in the history of Russia. Right now, at this point where we are, there is no room for compromise. I don't see any outcome where, for example, Navalny supporters apply for a permit and the state says, okay, sure, because in the past that's happened. In the past they would try to kind of dampen or tone down the escalation by giving some concessions. Like, for example, sure, we'll give you that square to demonstrate as long as you do it peacefully. And yeah, sure, everybody comes for a peaceful demonstration, demonstrates, and then another week, and then another week, and then week after week, the protest just whittles down. And for example, at one of the rallies in 2011, there were like hundreds of thousands of people. But now, weeks after weeks after weeks, only dozens of thousands turn up, and then it's hundreds of people. Mm-hmm. So that was one strategy of whittling down the people's motivation and commitment to protest, and that's a pretty effective strategy. But we are past that point, so there's very little room for compromise, because now, there can be you can negotiate with an enemy. That Navalny was in the eyes of the Kremlin a few years ago, but not with a traitor. Yeah. The state cannot back down, and it cannot allow peaceful demonstrations, because in its own eyes it will be seen as weak, as given in, and they cannot do that in case of Navalny.
Right.
Maybe if it were someone else, probably yeah.
Right.
But also there is not much room to go in the other direction. because if they do engage the demonstrations with water cannons and rubber bullets and tear gas, which we do know for certain that they have in their stock, because we can there have been some investigations before, and you can look at the for example, you can look at state procurement contracts, and you can see that they have an ample supply of water cannons and tear gas and those subsonic things that make you puke. So they have all that.
Right. They just haven't used it.
Yeah, but doing that would cross a line, a point of no return, where the violence at these demonstrations will be now significantly more, will carry a lot more risk for the demonstrators than it does now. But I don't have a definite answer to you why all this firepower has never been employed before. But my kind of educated guess is that those images of protesters in Germany and Italy and the United States being pepper sprayed with rubber bullets that gouge eyes and do some pretty serious irreparable damage to people's bodies. The imagery has been used for the entirety of Putin's term, basically. I've covered these demonstrations from year 2000, and it's always been an argument in state propaganda, like, we're going easy on you guys, unlike those Americans.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, he has a point in that specific case.
Once you cross that line,
right,
you lose that high moral ground.
Right. Yeah. High moral ground in air quotes. Exactly. I agree. So, you mentioned this earlier. Well, when Navalny got back to Russia, actually when he was in prison, his team released this hour-and-a-half long video alleging that Vladimir Putin has built a palace that cost $1 billion, paid for in bribes by people close to him. I've seen some estimates, including in your op-ed, that the video has been viewed over 100 million times. An aide to Navalny said Putin, quote, could not ignore what the whole country is discussing, which is why he responded to these charges on the record today. Is there any way to quantify that? Like, do you think it's true that this video about the palace was dinner table conversation across Russia? And were you surprised that Putin actually commented on this story?
Yeah, the fact that he did actually come out to personally to personally deny the allegations, and you can see how his legalistic brain works. I mean, he sees himself as a plaintiff in a court. What he said was literally, not me or any of my closest relatives have anything to do with the palace.
Right.
Which is not what the investigation claimed. It painstakingly described a network of intermediaries connected to Putin via an incredibly intricate network of companies owned and sub-owned by different people who have at least some very remote but some degree of connection to Putin. And that's intentional.
Right.
So nobody actually claimed that it was Putin's palace.
Right.
It is in fact, but not on paper. So they dug up incredible amounts of all the paper trails that lead to Putin, and they actually missed a lot of spots. And we're doing, us and other independent media in Russia are now very busy doing follow-up investigations to that. And sure, it looks pretty much what it says. I mean, it's a lot of a massive paper trail leads to it's not a Swiss bank account. It's a massive palace. You cannot,
hard to hide.
So we are in a stage right now. So the initial reaction from Putin's spokesman was, I don't know anything about any palace. There is no palace. But, like, guys, you can see it from space. You can literally see it from space. You can go on Google Maps and see.
So has this been like dinner table conversation? Is this the thing?
Oh yeah, sure.
Talking about? Yeah.
I mean, all the little details from these investigations are basically memes now.
Right.
Yeah. And yes, sure. It's the talk of the town. I mean.
Back to Navalny for a second. I mean, I think a lot of listeners to this show, a lot of Americans have been understandably inspired by his courage in the face of a regime that has tried to murder him, his fight against corruption. Those are seen as noble things. But, I think you've made the point that doesn't mean that a Western audience would necessarily be thrilled by all of his views. My co-host on the show and I have talked a bit about Navalny's nationalism, his position on Crimea, for example. But could you give a listeners a sense of sort of like what Navalny believes, maybe warts and all, some of the things that they might not necessarily think are shared values?
Okay, so we have to establish a common kind of measure here. Because by American political kind of framework, what you would call liberals in Russia, including Navalny, would probably be considered right-wing libertarians in the United States.
Got it.
Yeah. So Navalny is even further to the right in his views. And sure, he was, you can safely call him far right in the early stages of his career. And he would pretty much open about that. And he, given a chance, several chances actually, to publicly retract his views, he never did. He actually doubled down on them. And it's not, it's not some secret, it's not some shameful past he's trying to sweep under the rug.
Right.
He's pretty open about his beliefs, although he's very much toned them down in the recent years. You'll never hear him refer to people from the Muslim republics on Russia's fringes like he used to, like a decade ago. So because he understands as a politician and not as a member of a fringe right-wing movement, I don't know if he's genuinely evolved in his political views, or he's just being coy so as not to alienate a large swath of his electorate with a more internationalist and liberal views. I do not know that, but it's a fact that he's much moderate in his rhetoric now. But it's all legitimate points for discussion. But the thing is that he's not being persecuted for his views. That's his views on immigration, where he's it's ironic because Vladimir Putin is much more liberal than Navalny. I
didn't know that.
In many political areas, like immigration, for example, Navalny is much further to the right than Putin, and probably closer to Donald Trump in his views on immigration.
I didn't know that. That's interesting. That's fascinating. But I mean, maybe that's what makes him so dangerous, right? He can outflank Putin on the right and in other places on anti-corruption. Yeah,
and a couple of years ago, he also started courting the left-wing audience by promoting, and example, labor unions. Mm-hmm. So he's kind of he's definitely a populist.
Interesting.
And he's courting both the right wing, the centrist, and the leftist audience.
Got it.
That is true. But the thing is that he's not being persecuted for any of those views. None of his political positions on the left, on the right, or center matter when he is persecution by the state is concerned.
Right.
He is only being persecuted for his anti-corruption investigations. Right. That is the only thing that matters. So once, and I'm not his advocate, not at all. And actually, we don't always see eye to eye. And Medusa, the publication I work for, is near the top of his naughty list.
Oh, really?
Okay. Yeah, because we've called him out in the past. I mean, we're not his allies.
Right.
But what I want to say is that it's clear that none of this matters at this point. So whenever he runs for office, and he has some right-wing points on his platform, sure, let's debate that. Let's call him out on that. But we are not there yet, or if we'll ever be.
Right. No, I totally agree. I just think it's important to sort of understand the whole person, even when So that they're not like lionized today, and then you feel like they let you down later because you didn't necessarily know everything about them. I think we can have two ideas at the same time, that maybe we disagree with him on immigration, but that his anti-corruption fight is incredibly brave, and sort of talk about the whole person. My last question for you is, you may have noticed that the United States just went through kind of a minor coup attempt by President Trump that ended with a fascist mob attacking the U.S. Capitol. It's hard for me to imagine an series of images that could do more to denigrate the United States, undercut democracy, undercut our system of government, than seeing those marauding thugs, running through the U.S. Senate, looking like gigantic assholes. Were those images, were those events the focus of propaganda or just general news coverage? Like, how was that played across Russian media?
You betcha. I mean, sure, they used it. They used those images to the fullest extent possible. What I'm seeing right now on Russian television and on pro-government social media, they are portraying Trump supporters, and especially those who stormed the Capitol, as pro-democracy activists who are defending the right for free elections, and now they are being unfairly persecuted. So this is I'm not kidding you. This is what the Russian television is saying.
Yeah, sounds like our Fox News.
Yeah. So there are the Russian television on many occasions it's really outfoxed Fox News.
Good.
But yeah, it's not. But there's no real political position there. It's just they're using it as really just a prop to say. So you see, in the States, they are, people are fighting for their democracy. And the state is persecuting them much harshly than we are dealing with malcontents back home.
Right.
So this is again going back to this kind of whataboutism that is the pillar of Russian state propaganda. So
right.
I don't think they really care about the capital or the fate of American democracy. They're just using these events as a prop. But yeah, I mean. In all fairness, it did really look quite.
Yeah, it was bad. It was really bad.
Yeah,
really
nothing.
bad.
That's like and it's given endless fodder for the same propaganda and at the same time there's the because they really have no internal logic that you can argue with. So in the same breath, they can claim that these protesters are. This is a peaceful democracy movement that's fighting for a free and fair election, and it's in the same breath they can say, so you see what political instability leads to. Do you
right.
want armed people in Russia storming government buildings? You
right.
don't want that.
No, yeah. You want Father Putin keeping us all safe and everyone's warm and cozy. Oh boy. Well, reason number 1,550,000 to be embarrassed by the events of January 6th. Alexei, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for your great reporting. Where can folks find all the work you're doing at Meduza if they want to read up more?
So the website is Meduza with a Z, meduza.io.
Cool.
And we have an English version as well. So it's the same URL, meduza.io/en. We have an
Great.
English version, and there's a link on the front page, and you can see there's a bunch of my reporting there as well in English.
That's fantastic, and I think everybody should check it out and support independent news reporting all over the planet because we need more of it. So thank you for the work you're doing. Thanks for your time today, and really appreciate it.